Good morning. Ask him to do what? Move in like this. I'm being given signals like this from Brian Alderman, which I guess means he wants you to move in. Or he was just dancing. I don't know. That may have been, I'm not sure what that was. So please scoot together as we do have more people trickle in. Good morning. At some point, and I'm not sure yet, I haven't figured out the exact date, the tradition of the student lecture at King became part of our life. Every year, faculty vote on 2 students to come and speak. We regard this as quite an honor. Every year you get this list of students, and you look through the list and you think, who is it that I want to hear from? It's not just a matter of a high GPA. It's not just a matter of eloquence in the lectern. But there are many things that go into that decision, and it's an enjoyable decision, although often a difficult one. Last fall, we heard from Sam Barker, and this morning we have the pleasure of Desmond Darko. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Aaron Kingsley to introduce Desmond.
Good morning. So, happy day after Super Bowl. Hope we're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed this morning. I struggled with writing this introduction for Desmond for many reasons. It's hard to describe briefly what sort of person Desmond is. Form, packaging, design, genre, these things matter to him, so the usual spoken introduction didn't seem quite fitting. Desmond needs a modernist manifesto, but he's too snarky for such earnest emotion. Okay, then maybe he needs a postmodernist romp, like one of his favorite authors, Danielewski, but he's too skeptical for invention's sake. So maybe a voyant word cloud would do, but that would entail the use of a screen, and I did not want to risk technology going rogue on me. Puppets, too banal. Poetry, too academic. Rap? No, not rap either. So when invention and artifice fail, one must go back to the basics. Desmond Darko was born February 22nd, 1996, in Jonesboro, Arkansas. How many Arkansas natives do we have out here this morning? 0? Hands? 0? We have 0. 1, maybe 1. He's not quite sure. Okay. Desmond's parents, George and Irene, were both immigrants from the West African nation of Ghana. By the time Desmond was 8, his family had settled in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, outside of Knoxville, if I'm not mistaken. After an unsuccessful one-year tryst with computer science, Desmond eventually, and wisely I might add, chose to major in English after transferring to King University fall 2015. These may be the facts, but they don't speak to Desmond proper. He's a formidable artist and a loyal friend. He's a sharp and erudite reader of literature when he gets around to doing the reading, which is not always. He's a brilliant computer programmer and is interested in using a blend of technology and storytelling to create art while simultaneously questioning what art is. He has worked on numerous artistic projects, including The Pink House, an animated show featuring live music. His work prompts the viewer to reconsider their role as consumer and the role of the show as the product being consumed. He reinvents art by blurring the lines of form, pushing boundaries in content, and playing with expectations by subverting meaning-making and blasting binaries. There's the language of the manifesto bleeding through. So no pressure, Desmond. We expect great things from you. I'm so very proud of you already and proud to call you my friend. Please welcome Desmond.
So come on down to Chicken Little Restaurant in Abingdon, Virginia, and we'll show you little is best.
All right. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Sorta? Okay, good. It'll work. I want to thank you guys for coming out on this very cold, it's really cold, February morning. And I'd like to thank the faculty and staff for selecting me for the position of your student lecturer for this semester. So I'd like to do a bit of speaking first, about 20-ish minutes, and then we'll shift gears onto what I've been working on for the last few years, few months. I'm not really sure. It's been a long time, but yeah, definitely. So there are a lot of things I don't like about kids, but there's one thing I can admire, and that's their tenacity towards asking the question, why? I think sometimes we as adults and semi-adults forget what it was really like being young and being surrounded by a world of strange rituals that we find ourselves acclimated to in our advanced age. These questions vary from the seemingly pointless ask to self-evaluating, world-changing queries. Take a kid asking his father about a bottle of David Beckham cologne sitting on their bathroom counter. Dad, why do you buy David Beckham cologne? Well, son, because it makes me feel good and smell good after a shower. Does it really smell like David Beckham? I'm not sure, son. Then why does it have his name on it? Because he sponsors it, son. Why don't you have your own cologne, Dad? Maybe when you're older, son, you'll have your own cologne line. Does that mean I'll be more successful than you? Maybe. Does that make you a failure? Okay, son, stop asking questions. And so on, and so on. Now, if children can participate in this apparently endless discourse that drives the answer to their deepest vindications, why do we find ourselves exempt as adults? You'd imagine that those further along in life would find more to question through their observations during the years. Well, instead of becoming more curious about the world, oftentimes we become less so. Things come to be bland and commonplace, even if from an outsider's point of view, they're extremely unusual. Take, for example, Wendy's Frosties and their fries. If I ask a Southerner what to do with these two items, their response would not only confuse but also disgust someone from only 800 miles across the country. Mind-blowing. Find yourself asking why, but too afraid to insult someone's lifestyle by doing so. Boy, do I have a great solution for you. No, it's not expensive, nor is it the answer to the keto diet sure to make you lose 50 pounds in a year or your money back. It's something that we see around us every day, a word thrown around and abused more often than it is defined. Yes, I'm talking about art. Oh God, I'm sure you're thinking. He's come up here today to talk to me about art. I already finger painted in elementary school. How much longer do I have to suffer this nonsense? Just a bit longer. I promise there's a payoff. Art seems to have become somewhat of a dirty word. Not in the sense that liberal and conservative are, but one solely through a very confusing history of semantics. A lot of people think art only exists in a museum curated by a woman with an Egyptian cotton 1,000 thread count scarf who drinks tea that's been through at least 12 ports in Shanghai, and that if you dare challenge her authority, you'll be labeled as nothing more than a Philistine and a poopy head. But you don't have to be Charles Saichi or Damien Hirst to know what good art is, especially if you don't know who either of those two people are, which I don't expect you to at all. Oftentimes, we're told to appreciate paintings, sculptures, and other works of art that make no appeals to us aesthetically or emotionally. Take a Rothko, for example. Big, awkward blocks of color on a canvas. Anyone could do that. But we're told that they're amongst the highest valued works of the last 100 years in the plastic arts. How could this be? Well, for one, they make us question our definitions of what makes a good painting. They make us ask, why? If you compare a Rothko to the work of Rembrandt, for example, there's a distinct difference in aesthetic that we can immediately apply. The Rembrandt, of course, seems to have had a lot more work go into it. So to the common person, if we ask them, which of these shows more artistic merit? 90% or more of them would probably point towards the Rembrandt. And that's all well and good, and to be appreciated to an extent, as it's significantly more difficult to put together the latter rather than the former. But this is a very one-dimensional view of the question. It loses, if the amount of effort or scarcity of skill applied to a work is its most important factor, we lose out on the sentimentality of macaroni art, or maybe even the significance of your first drawing in kindergarten. A home-cooked meal would lose its value against a world-class chef's cooking every time. Handmade cards would be irrelevant as opposed to their Hallmark counterparts. Now, how does this relate to why again? Well, I believe that perhaps the most important factor in an artwork is its ability to ask its audience why and to make the pursuit of said answer, of said question, an experience worthwhile and meaningful. Too often in life, the question why is a nuisance. Someone asks you why you chose your significant other, it doesn't come off as endearing, it almost appears to be an assault of your love. If someone asks you why you dress the way you do, it's an attack on your fashion sensibilities. Why becomes toxic in these situations, and art allows us to make why life-affirming and rejuvenating again. In our quotidian existence, we go from end to end, action to action, without asking why even once, sometimes intentionally. The cars we drive operate in a mysterious perfection until we hear a creaking in the back tires. We go to the mechanic and they magically fix the problem in exchange for money. Oftentimes we bypass the explanation of the error itself just to make our minds less cluttered from an already busy and tiresome week. This is a dangerous state of mind for one to have in a casual life, one that actively avoids acquisition of knowledge, more points of view, for it can easily bleed into other endeavors. A sense of apathy drowns out the senses, and a life of unremarkable processes is lived. Before you know it, you're 30, which I'm not saying is old at all. I mean, like, that's from my perspective as a student and like all the students here, because that's like 10 years down the line or so. And all your dreams, untouched, have decayed within a short period of 8 to 10 years. It seems far away because of the raw amount of boring garbage between that point and this. You gotta get car insurance, health insurance, get your own place, get a stable job, make sure your boss doesn't hate you, etc., etc., etc. All the while never asking why. Why are these things valued? The general pressure of the comforts of life keep you warm at night, but also weigh you down gradually until you can't stand upright with new ideas. Is this a slippery slope? Maybe. But it's also how many people I've met choose to mete out their existence in teaspoons, who want a life that can be quantified in a spoon. Art has no spoon. Art allows us to experience the thoughts and emotions of people who existed before our time in a language that is effectively ageless. Yeah, Shakespeare's pretty cool. Lived 500 years ago, and we still watch his work performed, and even still analyze its contents. But you know what's equally, if not more impressive? Looking at the cave paintings in Lascaux, France, and understanding what human beings over 17,000 years ago were experiencing with not a single letter between them. Isn't that some sort of weird telepathy or time travel? No, it's what we can get through art. It makes why a beautiful thing. I had forgotten about that beauty that liberating sense of why in the last few months, and I was lucky enough to have a jolt from it recently. It's part of why I'm thankful to have gone to this university rather than to drown in the sea of carelessness at a bigger school like UT. UT's still a pretty cool place, just saying. I went to a meeting for the philosophy club last week, and leading up to the meeting, I assumed no one would go because philosophy's for nerds, right? And this campus is filled with athletically and also intellectually gifted individuals who I assumed thought that there would be better ways to spend their time. The club had been inactive for about a year, and the former leadership I had known had largely graduated or dissipated. Lo and behold, we had a surprising turnout of 10 plus, 4 being wrestlers, and another 2 being soccer players. The subjects of discussion were free will and power dynamics, the Stanford prison experiments being the main crux of our analysis. After watching a short documentary on the study, we went around freely talking about the nature of man in a situation of power, whether or not the students chosen to be prison guards had to be as cruel as they were to the prisoners. What was interesting was that many people in the room accepted that the cruelty was some sort of inevitability of the position of power, that power in and of itself corrupts, a common excuse that we apply to those above us often, especially politicians. There was one guy there, however, who insisted that we as human beings have the will to choose, the will to decide our own actions and effectively our own destinies. He said that the prison guards could have chosen to be kind and empathetic to the prisoners at any time, but effectively made the decision not to act that way. In my mind, I scoffed. Man is nothing more than an animal of conditioning. Since all the guards saw and understood about prison were through Hollywood depictions of guards being terrible and draconian, they acted appropriately. And then I caught myself and felt some manner of true despair. I had fallen into the narrative of helplessness that I would have so readily rejected in the past. The justification of bad behavior because of one's background rather than their choice. I had accepted that people had little to no choice in how they acted or what they aspired to be. The mundane had become my prison, and here was the student actively knocking on the door, telling me to come out because he knew that the cell had never been locked, or rather, maybe it could only be locked from the inside. Needless to say, I thanked him after. Of course, I wouldn't categorize his words in and of themselves to be art, but they transmuted a similar effect. The reality of another breaking me out of my own. It's experiences like this that I feel that we miss out on by getting stuck in the comforts of an unchallenged life. And I believe art is that wake-up call. It's the knock on the cell door. Thank you all. So now for part 2 of my presentation, and I'm going to get a little bit more loose here because I'm going to have to. So for the last 4 or so years, I had an overwhelming sense to work on something big. I was always reluctant to call myself an artist because that implies a certain amount of arrogance and a lack of realistic perspective that I detested more than anything. For years, I wondered how to apply my talents in the arts, which mostly revolved around illustration, into a form that was more dynamic. My brain, I'd come to notice, had a certain tendency to generate images in connection to speech and, more curiously, melody, music. And that's when I knew I was screwed. I sucked at music. I still suck at music. Didn't know what a chord was, barely know what one is now. In fact, I actively avoided music most of my life. When kids in early high school asked me what kind of music I listened to, I responded to them mostly confused, who sits around and listens to just music? Needless to say, I got out of that strange relationship with music and I began to find some artists that fit my taste. So during the summers, I went on a few runs. Since I wasn't too keen on working out, and also I wanted to remove myself from the dungeon that was my room on a semi-regular basis, I began to take my phone and a pair of headphones out with me. Mostly everyone I knew who was somewhat physically active told me that running was the most boring form of cardio, except for my dad, of course, due to his fanaticism for track and field. So I went out and did these 30-minute, 3-mile treks, nothing too intense. What I found on those runs, however, was, as I listened to the music with its pounding bass and cyclical drums and its instrumental chords, images were generated in response. The rhythm acted as a through line, a canvas of a particular shape, while my mind became an active painter, creating and deleting images actively. Explosions of yellow, strings of red, I could effectively generate anything as long as it fit the song. Whole stories were told through a mere 3-minute song. Certain songs having a more blue and purple palette, while others having a blinding flame color rotation. Whenever I returned from my runs, however, I was disappointed because I couldn't capture what I had experienced. I was having visual and audio concerts in my mind with no way to show the rest of the world. That was until I dredged up Eclipse, a Java programming IDE, which is essentially a program that allows you to create programs. I had taken a solid year of programming in community college, and by the time I had gotten to data structures, which I don't recommend any human being ever taking, ever, it's not English, it's not anything comprehensible, I realized that English was perhaps the better route. But in that period, I did gain some manner of programming ability, nowhere near professional, but I could mosey around a blackjack program or even a video player. Long story short, I managed to find code for a simplistic video player, and I was ecstatic. I knew that if I could modify it correctly, I could effectively create a visual instrument. Unfortunately, all the comments in the code were in Chinese that had been scrambled into random letters and symbols. So I buckled up and spent the last 6 months tinkering, Googling, and experimenting until late January when I had finally completed what I had desired. A visual instrument with 10 keys that could be loaded with any video clips I desired. Simultaneously, I couldn't resist creating a short project in relation to what I was working on. Luckily, I still had my copy of Ableton Live 9 from high school when I had made a very crude and nightmarish mixtape, which I still have locked up on a flash drive so that anytime I get too cocky, I can humble myself with how bad I was then. The project I titled Mr. Onionhead in relation to the shedding of layers I had felt myself undergoing during the process. It consists of 2 parts, a visual album, as I call it, and an ongoing Instagram comic, 5 pages a week. The album itself is 9 tracks, only 6 of which I'll be sharing with you today, since the rest are still undergoing some visual editing, and I'd like to think of myself as a perfectionist and don't like to show unfinished work. So without further ado, I present to you Mr. Onionhead. Ooh. So you have to excuse me, I'm gonna have to remove this tunic right now.
And the lost and the saved will stand before Jesus for him to decide who's saved and who's lost. That produces tremendous conflicts and contradictions in understanding the Word of God. And you know what, friend? A lot of people are wrong in their doctrine because of pride. They will not accept the fact that they are illogical in their thinking, that what they hold to will not logically stand up. And there's not one doctrine in the Bible that's a true Bible doctrine that would prove.
Can you all still hear me? Okay, good, awesome, great. So, if the laptop will turn on. There we go. I think the projector went to sleep on us. I think it might have. Not really sure. Can, oh yeah, gotcha. This one? Power. Yeah, you have to bear with me. Like, figuring out how to get all of this working when you're just an English major was probably the most nightmarish experience of my entire life. I pretty much spent the entire summer just going out to this very old theater and tinkering with their very rudimentary setup with their projector and everything like that. And they're always confused as to what I was doing because I was sort of messing with their settings, and they were like, "So are you some sort of, musician or magician or something like that?" And I was like, "I don't really know what I'm doing, and I really hope I'm not bothering you guys." So I'm very grateful to them still. There we go. So the program itself, I titled C4 Live because it's a sort of an amalgamation of two of the most influential instructors in my life. Mr. Foyer, one of my English professors who convinced me to go and get an English degree, as well as Mr. Seaford, who was the first art teacher who told me that I sucked. But he was encouraging about it, which is important, because there's oftentimes a lack of enthusiasm and a lack of intentionality in high school and grade school art. So I appreciated that very much. So let's get started here. All right, so this first one is called Strange Meadows. Move down the mouse here. Can we turn up the volume a little bit? All right, so I said 6. It's definitely 6. So this next one is number 2. I called this one The Great Escape.
Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. Great escape. What a great escape.
All right, cool. So, yeah, at first I was trying to modify this keyboard into like an actual keyboard, and then I realized that that's really hard, and then that's engineering, and I don't want to do that at all. So, yeah, I just use a regular keyboard that I bought off of, I think, Amazon or something like that. Anyway, so this next one is called Metro Tangerine. You know, this all sounds a lot better not being in my like tiny room doing this on like a laptop screen. Like it all just feels a lot better, definitely. So this is the fourth one. I call this one Meltdown. Thank you. Now, this fifth one is the longest one. It's about, actually, I don't know how long it is. I don't really remember. It's not that long, though. It's like 5 minutes. This one is called Limbo Gear Shift. Okay. All right, so this last one is super short. It's like 2 minutes. It's personally my favorite, so yeah, and I can tell some of you guys are pretty anxious to go. I mean, I would be too. Class is so exciting. Yeah, so this one's called Good Girl.
Parting shot? Or
Yeah, I want to thank you all for coming here today, yeah, just thank you.
When I mentioned earlier that when we choose the student lecturer, we want something beyond just GPA, beyond just the ability to speak. We look for something that shows originality of thought and the ability to synthesize what you're learning across disciplines in college. Few student lecturers have done this better than Desmond just did. And if you really want to compliment him, ask him the art question, why? Because I think he would like to answer that. One of the things that I didn't realize is that I was in charge of getting a plaque. So this one has my name on it. And I'm not actually going to give it to Desmond, but one very like it we will be presenting to him at some other date. Please join me in thanking Desmond once more. That was fantastic. Really great. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it.
I mean, I didn't
So
know
what
it
are
was
you doing? Is the keyboard controlling where the images show?
Yeah.